It was a rough night. There's no other way to put it. After the heist, after everything that had gone wrong, I couldn't shake off the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. My body was tense, but my mind was a little too numb to process much. I didn't care what happened next. I didn't care about getting caught. Tonight, I was letting the chaos consume me. The bar was dimly lit, almost as though it were trying to hide the faces of people who didn't want to be seen, or perhaps didn't care. I shuffled into the corner, nursing my drink as I tried to quiet the war in my head. I was on edge, and that's when it happened. A man at the bar was older, but not by much, was talking to someone next to him when I saw him glance at me. Maybe it was the way I looked. Maybe it was the way I carried myself. But his attention felt far too sharp to be coincidence. Without thinking, I moved swiftly, my fist colliding with his jaw in an almost reflexive motion, sending him sprawling across the bar floor. It was a mistake. I knew better than to draw attention in places like this, especially with my track record. But tonight, I didn't care. I could feel eyes on me as I turned away, trying to avoid the drama. Before I could take a step further, a voice came from behind me, low and steady, with a hint of amusement. "Rough night. Buy you a drink?" I froze for a second, the voice feeling almost too calm, too aware for the situation. When I turned, I was met with sharp green eyes and a posture that screamed confidence. It didn't belong in a place like this. The man was clean, well-dressed, with an air about him that suggested he didn't belong in the shadows like the rest of us. "I'm Ethan," he said, extending his hand. I didn't take it. I was done with handshakes for the night. Instead, I moved toward the bar and ordered another drink, hoping he'd take the hint. But Ethan didn't leave. Instead, he followed, leaning on the counter, his eyes never leaving me. "Care to tell me your story?" he asked, his tone light teasing. "You got a reason to care?" I sneered, not bothering to hide the suspicion in my voice. He didn't even flinch. Maybe I just like a challenge. I narrowed my eyes, instinctively sizing him up. There was something about his presence that felt magnetic, unsettling, and for a split second, I almost felt like I was being drawn into something I wouldn't be able to escape. I took a long sip of my drink to cover the feeling. I don't need friends. His smile barely shifted, but it was enough to make me second-guess myself. Maybe not, but something tells me you do need a distraction. I could feel myself bristling at the implication. The truth was, I wasn't here for friends or distractions. I was here because I needed to be alone, to think, to forget what I had just done. "Yeah?" I muttered. "And what makes you think that?" "I can read people," he said simply, shrugging. "Not that difficult when someone's standing right in front of me with a fight brewing inside them." I didn't know why I stayed. Normally, I would have pushed someone like him away. But tonight, I was feeling reckless, a little too untethered. Before I could even stop myself, the words slipped from my mouth. "All right then, what's your story?" For a moment, Ethan's playful expression faded. His eyes grew distant, and I could see the shift in his posture. He wasn't pretending anymore. "Nothing special," he said softly. "Just running from life. Running from everything, really." It was a strange thing for someone like him to say. His demeanor didn't scream someone who's running, but there was something in his eyes. Maybe it was the way they looked at me, or maybe it was something deeper. Either way, it hit me harder than I expected. "I get that," I muttered, taking another sip of my drink, trying to avoid his gaze. He studied me quietly, as though he were peering straight into my soul. Normally, I would have snapped at him, told him to mind his own business, but for some reason I couldn't. His presence was calming, but not in a way I could describe. "So what now?" I asked, feeling irritated but intrigued. Ethan took a step closer. His cheek brushed against mine, and the air seemed to shift. I froze, heart hammering against my chest, a strange tension swirling between us. "Want to find an empty room?" His voice dropping low. My body jolted back in surprise. I was caught off guard. The invitation wasn't what I had expected, but it was more than that. It felt dangerous. Not in the way I was used to, though. I felt something else, something I wasn't prepared for. "No," I said too quickly, but my eyes lingered on his lips, and before I could stop myself, I nodded. Fine, let's go. A few minutes later, we found ourselves in an empty room, the noise from the bar fading into muffled hums in the distance. I sat down on the edge of the bed, still trying to make sense of the whirlwind inside my head. So, I said, breaking the silence, what's your game here? Ethan sat beside me. Not too close, but just enough to make my pulse quicken. Thought we both could use a little distraction. I scoffed, trying to brush off the strange pull I felt. You don't know a thing about me. His gaze softened slightly, but it wasn't pity. Maybe not, he replied. But I know enough to see you're running from something too. I wasn't used to people seeing me that clearly. Most didn't care to look past the surface. But Ethan wasn't like most people. He was different. I couldn't explain it, but I felt drawn to him, even though I knew I shouldn't be. What do you want from me? I whispered, my voice barely audible in the quiet room. Just a moment, he said, his voice steady but kind. Before I could respond, he closed the space between us, his lips meeting mine in a kiss that was so unexpectedly soft. I lost myself in it. It wasn't what I had expected. It wasn't what I was used to. Right. A moment later, he pulled away, his breath uneven as his gaze met mine. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a strange sense of clarity. But the morning after, everything changed. I woke up with a pounding headache, the bed beside me empty. Ethan was gone. It was the same feeling I always had after a night like this, an overwhelming mix of regret, confusion, and something else I wasn't ready to face. I sat up slowly, the weight of the night pressing down on me. What the hell had I just done? Then I saw the police. A few officers stood outside the door, their presence sending a wave of cold dread over me. I thought I was safe here, safe from the world, from everything. But life had other plans. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the officers just outside the door. I wasn't sure if they had noticed me yet, but instinct kicked in. I quickly grabbed my jacket, pulling it on with shaky hands. My head was spinning and my heart was racing. I needed to get out of there, fast. I wasn't sure what I was running from, but I knew one thing. I couldn't be caught in this mess. Not with everything that had gone down the night before. I silently cursed Ethan. His sudden disappearance left me with more questions than answers. The kiss had been a mistaken, odd, fleeting moment I couldn't quite understand. But this was real, and it was happening. And I wasn't prepared for it. The officers were still there, just outside the door, talking in low voices. I could hear snippets of their conversation, but I couldn't make sense of it. Whatever they were looking for, it had to do with something bigger than just me. The way they moved, the way they spoke, this wasn't your average bar fight they were dealing with. I needed to move, quietly, without drawing attention. I slipped out of the back door of the building, hoping to stay unseen. The alley was dark and cold, the air biting at my skin as I crept through the shadows. I tried not to think about Ethan, not to let the confusing encounter cloud my thoughts. He wasn't important anymore. What mattered now was getting away, staying out of sight. But then, just as I reached the end of the alley, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Light but deliberate, like someone was following me. My stomach dropped. I spun around quickly, expecting to see an officer, but instead, I was met with a figure I hadn't expected. Ethan. "You're quick," he said, his voice a quiet echo in the night. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, and he was leaning against the wall, watching me with those unreadable green eyes. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, my voice harsher than I meant it to be. My heart was pounding in my chest, the adrenaline from the escape still coursing through me. I didn't want to deal with this right now, not after everything that had already happened. He shrugged, not at all bothered by my tone. I was hoping we could have a conversation, but it looks like you're in a bit of a hurry. Conversation? I scoffed. About what? You're just gonna vanish on me and then show up out of nowhere? Ethan didn't react to my words. Instead, his expression softened, like he was holding something back. "You're in deeper than you think," he said, his voice low. "There's more going on than what you've seen." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" He glanced around, making sure no one was nearby. You've been caught up in something bigger than you know. The cops? They're looking for you, not just for that little scuffle in the bar, but for something else, something dangerous. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean dangerous? Who are you, really? Ethan sighed, pushing off from the wall and stepping closer to me. You're not the only one who's running, he said. I'm trying to stop something, and you're tangled up in it now, whether you like it or not. His words were cryptic, but they weren't without weight. I could feel the urgency in his voice, the way his eyes seemed to drill into me as if he were waiting for me to understand. I took a step back. You're insane. I'm not tangled in anything. I don't even know you. He wasn't backing down, though. You don't have to know me to know you're in danger. The people you're running from aren't the kind of people you want to cross. Trust me, they'll stop at nothing. I swallowed hard, his words sinking in like a heavy stone in my chest. My instincts were screaming at me to get away, but the part of me that had been numb for so long, the part that didn't want to be alone anymore, told me to listen. Okay, I muttered, taking a step closer. Say I believe you. What then? What do you want from me? Ethan's gaze softened just a little. I want to help you, but I need you to trust me. Help me? I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. I don't even know you. How do I know I can trust you? He took a breath, his shoulders stiffening. You don't. But the truth is, if you don't start trusting someone soon, it'll be too late. They'll find you. And when they do, his voice trailed off, and I could see the weight of whatever he was carrying. It was almost like he didn't want to say the words out loud. I hated the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear. It made him more human than I wanted to admit. Fine, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. What do we do now? Ethan's lips curled into a faint smile. Now we get you out of here before the cops show up. I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't need to. I didn't even want to know. At that moment, I made a choice. One I wasn't sure about, but one I couldn't take back. I followed Ethan into the night, away from the alley and away from everything I thought I knew. We walked in silence for a while, both of us aware of the weight hanging over us, of the danger closing in. The city felt different now, darker, as though the shadows were alive and waiting to pounce. Ethan led me to an old warehouse on the outskirts of town, the kind of place no one ever went unless they had to. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I stepped inside, trying to shake off the lingering sense of unease that had followed me ever since Ethan's words. But something told me that whatever I had gotten myself into, it was only just beginning. As we walked deeper into the building, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the right choice, if trusting Ethan was the mistake that would get me caught, or if he was the one thing standing between me and whatever was coming. The door slammed shut behind us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just entered a world that I might never escape.